Okay, so any introduction for students to Paradise Lost must acknowledge it was a difficult work. It's our Mount Everest. Its language is dense and elevated, its syntax is complex, its allusions are rich and provocative, its length is daunting, and its themes are quite paradoxical in some ways. Moreover, critics have wrangled over its merit, literary, and its meaning for over 300 years. So, why would anyone read it if it can be difficult? Well, the answer, of course, is that reading Paradise Lost is, for all of its challenges, enormously rewarding. It contains majestic beauty and fascinating characters. You will not forget these characters. Memorable scenes and great metaphoric power. Um, to be honest, though, there are some parts that are less than stirring, and we will be skimming over those parts. But if we wade through these and get to the poem's riches, our patience will be rewarded. Um, I will also let you know that although certainly some students have really dreaded reading this, many students who have actually put in the effort have found it incredibly rewarding. In approaching the poem, however, there are a few things we should keep in mind. First, Milton was self consciously writing in a specific literary genre. He was writing the epic. Now, this is a form of poetry that has existed since antiquity. Some of the oldest literature in Western civilization comes to us in epic form. Obviously, Homer's The Odyssey and the Iliad are epics, as well as Virgil's Aeneid, built on that tradition. Traditionally, epics are long poems, either 12 or 24 books, that describe the great theme of a people or a nation. So some have suggested that the Old Testament is the epic story of the ancient Israelites. Epics also employ elevated language, invocations to the muses, supernatural interventions in the affairs of humanity, and descriptions of great and hazardous journeys. Lastly, they usually begin in the middle of things, which we all know what that Latin term is, right? So, in writing Paradise Lost, Milton was making a bold poetic statement. For his epic would not just be a story of a nation or of a people. Instead, he was taking it upon himself to write the entire story of the human race. And more daringly, he would attempt to justify why God allows us to suffer, why God allows evil to exist. He would even prescribe what our responses to this situation should be. Um, for his starting point, he turned to the Hebrew creation story of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis, but he definitely amplified it and elaborated on it far beyond the biblical version. Indeed, the entire story of the poem fits into a much larger narrative framework, which some critics have referred to as, quote, the four battle structure of Paradise Lost. So, this sequence of battles reflects Christian millennial view of history, at least a traditional one, from before the creation of the world to the end times. The battles comprise a series of conflicts between the forces of good and evil, although we are always aware that good will triumph in the end. How's that for dramatic irony? These battles, roughly sketched, cover the following events: Battle 1, Battle 2. Those two battles are shown in the Paradise Lost. Um, Battle 3 is covered in another of Milton's epics called Paradise Regained, which we're not reading, and then Battle 4. So, Paradise Lost, of course, is a Christian epic, more specifically, a Protestant epic, and more specifically, still, a Puritan epic. As a result, it's helpful when approaching the poem to have some historical background, especially as it relates to the contemporary religious tensions that played such a large part in Milton's life. That's why I had you look at the crash course of the Protestant Revolution first, and now to also describe that he was He had gone into retirement at 59 years of age when he wrote Paradise Lost. But um, the previous 20 years had been very, very tumultuous in English history, and Milton had been right in the thick of it, supporting the rebels who had executed Charles I, the king, in a religious war in England. Now, uh, the Protestant theology that underlies Paradise Lost traces its origin to the early 1500s and Martin Luther, his attack on the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. So, before Luther, the Catholic Church had always been the most successful in quelling challenges to its authority. But as you saw yesterday in the crash course, um, things changed because of the printing press. Luther's challenge succeeded, several reasons. He was tenacious, he had the printing press, and Luther also had aid from the princes of southern Germany. All that provided a great deal of cover for him. So I think that's pretty much all I need to tell you, except um, the general religious environment into which Milton was born. Let me say a little bit more of that. In England, Milton would have been familiar with three versions of Protestantism. First, Anglicanism, which was the official state religion and the most theologically conservative. Secondly, there was like the radical Protestants, whose extreme insistence on individualism would later give rise to Methodism. And then Puritanism, or the Puritans, a group who opposed the worldliness and corruption of the official Anglican Church. So some critics have said that epics are often written at the passing of an era. We know, for instance, that Homer's epics and heroes and gods of the Trojan War were composed hundreds of years after the war ended, and Virgil's Aeneid in the same way. Similarly, Milton wrote his epic after the Puritan cause in England had failed. He had, of course, been a part of the movement and one of its most passionate advocates, so it's hard not to think that in some ways Paradise Lost reflects his feelings about the lost cause. Into the story of Adam and Eve's fall, he poured his passion for God, his sense of tragic loss, and his hope for the eventual redemption of humanity. So, before we begin our discussion, there's something else I should say. Um, Sometimes, when discussing the poem with students who are Christian, I get the feeling that any criticism suggesting that Milton failed in his purpose is in some way an attack upon their religious beliefs. So, as a result, the discussion can or has occasionally degenerated into an argument over validity of Christianity itself. That is definitely not our purpose here. Um, Purpose is to entertain serious ideas by serious thinkers and to wrestle with them, and hopefully to gain some familiarity with them. So we'll discuss Milton in this spirit, with an openness to the points he tried to make and a willingness to criticize him when we feel he hasn't quite lived up to what he promised. That's enough. I hope you have a good evening. Don't forget to answer the Google questions on the Google form.